lovely people, my name is Emma and today I'm doing another 8th That Are Great, and this time we're going to be talking about horror books. Now I know that October is technically over at time of seeing this and Halloween was like yesterday, but spooky books should not just be reserved for October, and I think that they're really perfect for the autumnal and winter season. So I wanted to do these horror recommendations to continue the spooky vibes going all the way through towards the end of the year. So I have 8 books slash authors to recommend for you today, and we're going to jump straight in. The first author I want to recommend is Poppy Z. Brite. I have Lost Souls here and Exquisite Corpse, which is 2 of their books. Poppy Z. Brite is actually the dead name of Billy Martin, so I am now going to refer to them as Billy Martin from this point on in the video. So both of these are very gruesome books. Exquisite Corpse follows a serial killer and really is about torture, and then Lost Souls is kind of a retake of vampires. Kind of similar to Queen of the Damned, but not fully. I read both of these a really long time ago, so it's a little difficult to recommend them with any kind of real meaning, because obviously it's been years since I read them, but I do remember being super creeped out by them, and just like a quick flick through skim read of some of the bits, like the detail and kind of gruesome gore that are in these books is really intense. So I think Billy is really tapping into that like visceral, almost torture porn style kind of horror movie bit in a book, and I do really want to reread one of these, or maybe even read another one of his works at some point, to try and remind myself of why exactly they have stayed on my shelves for so long. You know, those books that like you just refuse to unhaul because you just have good memories associated with them, even if you can't fully remember the books themselves. You're kind of thinking like, why are you recommending a book that you can't even really talk about meaningfully in a video? And it's something which I struggle with sometimes when looking at kind of the backlist of books that I've read, but I don't hear Poppy Z. Brite be talked about very often, so I did want to recommend their books so that more people could at least give them a go, because I do think that they are landmarks in horror that don't get anywhere near enough attention. From one that I finished ages ago to one that I finished super recently, I'd also like to recommend White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi. This is a really creepy, strange, like literary horror about a haunted house that refuses to let a young girl go. Now, major trigger warnings for a lot of discussions of eating disorders. There's anorexia and pica, which is where you eat like non-edible things, so like plastic and stuff like that, in this book, and that is really kind of a central theme through it. So I would recommend avoiding this if that is something that you don't want to personally read. The book is super creepy and atmospheric and sort of spooky, and there's just a weird sense of foreboding the entire time. The writing style is very strange. Helen Oyeyemi does sort of very experimental stuff. I've read one of her other books before and really didn't like it because of the experimental nature, whereas this one for some reason really just resonated, and it was just like the house at one point is a narrator, and it sort of jumps from different perspectives, and it's doing funky stuff of whether it's like first person or third person, and just generally I left it with a real sense of like creepy, getting under my skin kind of feeling. So I really enjoyed this one, and I definitely want to try and check out another Helen Oyeyemi. An author that I'd like to recommend is Joe Hill, who is the son of Stephen King, and because of that, as you can imagine, has some really great creepy things in his back catalogue. That's my bunny, don't mind her. So this one is Nosferatu, which is about a creepy guy who steals children away to Christmas land and then basically kind of kidnaps them. It's kind of got sort of weird supernatural elements to it. It's kind of a showdown between him and this young woman who escapes his clutches as a child, and then as an adult has to try and rescue her son from him. It is, what I really enjoy about this one is it is taking something that should be really wholesome and sweet and innocent like Christmas, and it is just absolutely twisting it and making it awful and creepy and terrifying, and then the children get like little needles instead of teeth, and it's just gross. It is a bit long, as is often the case with Joe Hill's books, but I do think that it's worth it, and I just generally really enjoyed kind of the various description sort of atmosphere in it. Another one of his that I would recommend is actually his debut novel Heart-Shaped Box, which is about a guy who, like an aging rock star, who buys a ghost off of eBay, which is just this dead man suit, but a ghost actually does come with it, and it turns out the ghost is specifically out for revenge against him. And that one is one of my all-time favourite books. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. It is haunting and terrifying, and it is like a race against this really malevolent spirit, and yeah, generally I think that it's a wonderful piece. And unlike a lot of Joe Hill's other work, I think that Heart-Shaped Box is a lot tighter and a lot neater as a plot. He doesn't kind of Joe Hill has a tendency, similar to Stephen King, of just sort of letting things drift a little bit, which you do definitely get in Nosferatu, but Heart-Shaped Box is a really tight plot, personally. One that has been all the rage on BookTube, and I personally think for good reason, is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is a historical fiction set in Mexico in the 1950s, I believe, and it's about a young woman who is trying to rescue her cousin from this creepy house where she's married into this family, and it feels like there's something nefarious going on. Now, this isn't horror in the sense of, like, it's not trying to scare you, and I do think that there's a tendency when talking about horror books to assume that the goal is to, like, basically scare the bejeebers out of you, whereas this one is more about sort of a creepy foreboding. It falls under that kind of gothic thriller sort of title, but there really is a sense of menace and sort of that fever dream, not knowing what's real and what isn't, breaking boundaries of the supernatural, and I just generally really enjoyed it. There was one bit towards the end where they do a little bit of an exposition dump that I didn't personally like. I think they could have, so she could have like nuanced it through a little bit more, but other than that, I thought it was really, really cool, and I definitely want to check out more from Silvia Moreno-Garcia in the future. Oh, blah, blah, blah. An author that does not get enough attention is Adam Nevil. Adam Nevil is an amazing horror writer. I've read 2 of his books, and I don't dare pick up another one because the last book that I read gave me night terrors for such a long time afterwards. He's one of these authors that I really want to try and read again, but I don't know if I can genuinely handle it because I'm a bit of a wimp when it comes to horror. So that book in question, I believe, is either called The Last Days or The Last Rituals, and I can't quite remember which, but it is about a creepy cult that sort of got disbanded years ago, and this this documentary maker has been sort of invited to kind of make a film about them, but in doing so all sorts of crazy, freaky, supernatural things start to happen. These sort of creatures start to come out of walls to get him, and it is just sort of the way that the tension racks up through the book, and the way that these things sort of, you can really feel that struggle of them breaking through this kind of dimensional barrier to try and get him. And just there are a few scenes in it that honestly, even thinking about them today, still send shivers down my spine. They were so traumatic and so fantastic in equal measure. I've read another one of his called Apartment 16, which was really playing around with more of the kind of body gore, body horror kind of stuff, and I also really enjoyed that as well. So I would definitely say check him out if you are into horror and you haven't read one of his books yet, because he is iconic and needs more attention. One that is riffing off of more zombies is Max Brooks's World War Z. I think that this is a really, really cool book that totally deserves all of its hype. It's an oral history of a zombie war, so it's kind of a collection of like found footage, documentary, like interview transcripts, all sorts of things like that, about what it would be like if there was genuinely a zombie outbreak across the world. And I listened to this one actually back in kind of May, June time, just at the beginning of when the pandemic was really starting to hit the UK bad, and it was amazing to listen to how Max Brooks had kind of laid out these ideas and how closely that seemed to be mirroring what was happening in real life, which was obviously, like, I know the pandemic is not a zombie apocalypse, there's a big difference between like a respiratory disease and like people coming back from the dead and eating your face, but it's amazing how realistic he has made the zombie part of that really feel. It's very entrenched, ingrained into how I genuinely think our world now would react to it. I'd also totally recommend it on audiobook because the commitment from that full cast is amazing, and there are a few scenes in the sort of where the humans fight back against the zombies which were spine-chillingly good when it came to how well that they were acted. Plus, I always think that anything that is working off of like an oral history in a book works really well in audiobook form because they are almost like scripts, so it does make sense. Now we're going to talk about 2 graphic novels. I don't actually know if I have 8 in this video or 9. We're going to ignore that and just sort of talk about horror in general. So one of them that I think is really good fun is Chew by John Layman and Rob Guillory. This is about a guy who can tell the entire like life cycle of a piece of food by eating it, or of anything by eating it, and he actually works in the FDA, but kind of solving crimes. It's a very strange world. It's a world where chicken has been outlawed because of like a sort of bird flu type situation, and it's about him going off and having all of these sort of crazy wacky adventures. It's the kind of plot that when you try and summarise it, I'm remembering like vampires appear at one point, and it's a bit wacky and zany, but I really, really enjoyed it. I think that the character's good fun, and I really love the artwork. You've got all these kind of funky sepia tones to it, and I think that it's just highly entertaining. I've read the first 4 volumes of 12 and it is starting to dip a little bit, but I totally recommend the first 1 or 2, and I am intending to continue on the series and see if I want to like commit fully to it. But I do think that it's good fun, and it's kind of a quirky twist on sort of body horror and body gore, because a lot of the stuff in it is really gross, but the way that kind of the drawings are done and the sort of colouring is done, it kind of takes the edge off and makes it seem a little bit more sort of like quirky, wacky, rather than just like horror. One that I think is also absolutely amazing is Revival, which is by Tim Seeley and Mike Norton. This is apparently a rural noir, and I read the first 4 in the volumes and I think that they are phenomenal. It is about a world where a collection of the dead just come back to life. They're recently deceased, so they're not too gross looking, and it all happens in this tiny town in, I think, Wisconsin, but like a real sort of northern rural American area where everything's very cold, and it's kind of a tiny town where everybody knows each other, and it is about how do they deal with the ramifications of these people coming back from the dead who then can't be hurt, and sort of what knock-on effects does that have, how does society react to it, why is it happening. There's some sort of really freaky monster type thing that's sort of being ominous in the background that I think is going to become a much bigger plot line, but it's just really interesting exploring these 2 different things, and I love the characters. I think it's a really, really strong graphic novel horror, and I definitely want to finish the series off. So I think that's 8. I normally have my notes with me, but I forgot to grab them, so I believe that that is 8 horror books that I think are pretty great. If you have any recommendations for horror, please do leave them down below. It's something which I kind of dabble in from time to time. It really depends on my night terrors and whether I think that I'm going to be able to handle what's in the book, and also like how stressed I am about life in general, because my night terrors are definitely worse when like I'm under stress anyway, so it's something which I kind of have to be very careful with. But I do think that horror is a really fun genre that often gets overlooked, so I just wanted to recommend these for the spooky season, and many of these will carry you through to the end of the year, and will be great ones if you want to keep the Halloween spirit alive. So have a wonderful reading week. I've got to get off to work. I'll chat to you soon. Bye.